All right, we are back, and now we are looking at entrepreneurship and small business, and in particular, your marketing plan. Now, your marketing plan doesn't just consist of where you're going to be buying advertising, right? Your marketing plan is actually very broad. And it's very broad for a couple of reasons. As a small business and as a new business, you'll be figuring out a couple of things, right? You'll be figuring out your plan before you make your product. You'll be figuring out making your product and distributing it. And then finally, after you've sold your product. And we'll talk about each of these pieces in turn, but it's very important to remember that your marketing plan is going to be an all-encompassing thing, right? It's going to worry about every step of the way. Because every step of the way, as you'll find, is very important, right? So the first thing is how you define your product, right? So there's your core product, right? And we'll just write core. You'll understand that each piece is product, right? The core product, there's the actual product, and then there's the augmented product. So, for example, if you were starting a sneaker company, your core product is foot protection, right? Whether that's from the cold or from shock or from anything else, it's foot protection. Your actual product might be a sneaker, but your augmented product might contain some kind of additional padding for something like running. And so when you're thinking about your product, remember to think about all steps in that product, right? So if you're opening a restaurant, your core product is satisfaction from food, right? Or satisfying hunger. Your actual product may be empanadas, and your augmented product may be the best empanadas from, some place in Guatemala or whatever it is, right? Like you have some sort of augmented piece to your product. Okay. So the first thing you're going to be thinking about is your philosophy, right? Your marketing philosophy. And so there's a couple of different reasons to adopt different marketing philosophies, but the general trend has been from where we start at the top to where we go to the bottom. So the first one is a production philosophy, right? And your production philosophy is product-centric. So efficiency, and product, right? How do I make the most amount of product for the least amount of money, right? That's your focus in what you're doing. The second thing is sales, right? So this is something you might think about in terms of sell the most, right? So you're not as worried about how efficiently you make it. You're not as worried about how happy people are. You're trying to sell as much product as possible, right? And finally, it's consumer-centric, right? And consumer-centric products focus on satisfaction. How happy your customers are with a particular product, right? So in general, businesses tend to trend in this direction the more mature they get. And you can imagine why, right? So for example, when there were no shoes, the first guy to make shoes probably made them as efficiently and as much as possible because there was no one to compete with. So the satisfaction went from 0 to 100 because people were just happy to have shoes, right? Once several people started making them, the person that sold the most shoes had the biggest advantage to gain, right? But now that just about everybody can sell shoes and just about everybody can get them, consumer satisfaction is centric, right? And so that's where we tend to trend with businesses over time. Now, you might consider following different philosophies depending on your business, and none of them are wrong, right? We're simply talking about where things are trending, and as markets mature, the trend happens to be towards customer satisfaction, okay? Next, so what you'll have to conduct is a market analysis, right? So that's one of the ways you're going to figure out how you're going to sell something, where you're going to make it, what you're going to do with it, and so on and so forth. And the idea is that you want to identify right? You want to locate and you want to describe your customer. Right? Those are the three things you want to do, right? So by identify who's going to be buying what you're doing, right? Where are these people, right? So if you're making a product in New York for people in Tennessee, right, you want to be able to know that, right? And then finally, you want to describe what your customers want from the product, right? So if they're buying it because it's delicious, that's great. If they're buying it because it's comfortable, that's great, right? But you want to be able to go into as much depth as possible in each of those things. And we'll talk about the constraints on that depth and when more depth is actually damaging to what you're doing, right? So, you're going to want to focus on an initial segment of the population, right? As a small business, this is generally a good idea because your budget is constrained and you need to prove that you can at least be sustainable early on, right? So this can be geographic in nature. This can be geographic in nature, right? This can be a specific age, right? Or a specific need. Depending on what your product does and who it does it for, you're going to want to focus. And you're probably going to find some mix of these. So New Yorkers over 55 that need a post-retirement amusement park, for example, right? Or that need entertainment, right? Or need a full days of entertainment, right? And that have an income of over 55,000. We'll go into these different segments further into the lesson, right? So one of the things you're going to want to be aware of when you're putting together your market analysis is your competition, right? As far as I'm concerned, competition. And as far as we know, there is not a business that exists without competition, right? There simply isn't. Right? You always have competition, right? And so what you're going to want to perform on your competition is what is commonly known as a SWOT analysis, right? And a SWOT analysis looks at things like strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Right? Now you want to conduct this analysis both on yourself and your competition. You want to know where their strengths are and where your strengths are, because that's going to inform where the weaknesses are. And if you find that one of your competitors has a major weakness, for example, if Nike just didn't make running shoes, maybe that's their weakness, right? Or if they didn't make running shoes for the elderly, maybe that's their weakness, and that's the way that you can get to them, right? That creates your opportunities. The difference between strengths and weaknesses creates your opportunities, right? What opportunities are they taking advantage of, and what opportunities are left for you to take advantage of? And then threats are other companies that intersect at your opportunity segment, right? So if you've chosen to take advantage of a specific opportunity and there's other companies doing it, that's where you're going to want to put threats, and you're going to want to look at how they're operating and what they're doing, okay? So that's your SWOT analysis and your look at the competition. The next thing you're going to want to think about is marketing strategy. Marketing strategy. And for your marketing strategy, you're going to want to look at 1, product decisions. Right? The strategy is going to inform what products you're making, right? It's going to inform your distribution. How are you getting it to your customers? Right? So for example, a mismatch in distribution might be something like, well, my customers are over 65 seniors and I only distribute on the internet. That's not a great idea, right? My customers are in a very young demographic that doesn't go to the store yet, but I distribute to them via, liquidation stores, right? Also not a great idea, Right? So you want them to match up, right? The next thing you're going to want to think about is pricing. Right? Where do you price your product? And finally, promotion. Right? How do you get people interested? And we'll talk about each of these in turn in more detail, right? But your marketing strategy is going to inform the following things, right? And if you've never thought about this in the terms of your business or in the terms of a small business, you're going to want to consider it. And after you've learned this, now you can look at companies that are doing their advertising and think about, okay, well, what are their thoughts about promotion, right? Who are they targeting? Why is their pricing the way it is, right? Why do they distribute here but not there, right? And so as we start to look at the news and as you start to notice things around you, you'll notice that things happen for a very good reason usually. And you'll be able to discern those reasons, right? So for the product, the section is going to be pretty straightforward, right? When you're putting together a plan, it's going to be something like the product name, any kind of legal protection that you have, and any kind of intellectual property. Intellectual property, right? Hopefully by now you've decided what you're going to make, right? And so you're going to want to describe these things, and you're going to want to find if you have some advantages or disadvantages in these things. So for example, right, if you're starting a company, right, and you're deciding to name it, and you're deciding to sell sneakers, and you're going to name it Niky, right, pronounced Nike but spelled differently, you're going to run into a lot of legal problems, right? That's probably not a good idea. Okay, but if you decide to name your company Silver Sneakers and you're targeting seniors, you're probably going to get a lot of traction. Right? The next thing is your distribution. Right? So what you're going to want to include in this section of your marketing plan is the following. Are you going to be using third parties? If so, how much will it cost you? Right? So if you're distributing through Amazon, if you're distributing through a supermarket, right? If you're distributing something through third party, what's going to be the cost, and what is your justification for making that decision, right? Obviously, starting a supermarket just to sell your brand of chips doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Or, building your own online retailer just to bypass Amazon also is very expensive. So that's generally going to be your justification, right? How do you plan on persuading them to carry it, right? Now, this is a lot easier with Amazon. You can pretty much put almost anything on Amazon that you make as long as you can defend that it's yours and it has all the legal paperwork. But for a supermarket, you have to go to a buyer, right? You have to go to a buyer for that supermarket, and you have to tell them, well, I'd like to sell my milk on your shelf. And they'll tell you, okay, well, persuade me that it's different than all the other milks that we have, right? And you might say, well, it comes in chocolate and strawberry variety, and it's organic, and it's at a great price point, right? And they might say, okay, well, that's a great idea. So how are you going to persuade the third parties to carry what you're selling, right? And you're going to want to think about if you have a shared demographic, at least to a degree, right? And you're going to want to justify these third parties for that reason, right? So like I said before, if the majority of shoppers on Amazon are 45 and younger, if you're targeting 55-year-olds, that might be a tough sell, right? If the majority of the people buying your brand new frozen pizza are higher income people because it's a premium pizza, and you sell it at a low income supermarket that generally happens to be in low income areas, right? That's going to be tough, right? So you're going to want to think about whether or not you share demographics. Furthermore, for distribution, you're going to want to consider the following, right? Which is your supply chain. Supply chain, delivery, and perhaps most importantly, your lead time, right? So your supply chain is basically how broad and how difficult is it to get all the ingredients together and put them together under one product, right? So you're going to want to consider that, and you're going to want to consider where you have vulnerabilities, right? So you only have one pepperoni supplier, you're probably going to be in some trouble if they decide to charge you 5 times what you're currently paying, right? The second thing you're going to want to worry about is delivery, right? How are you getting it to your products? Is it delivered by mail? Is it express mail? Is it local mail? Can you ship it? Can you put it in a box? Do you have to hire a trucking company to get it to the supermarket, to get it to a distributor? And then finally is lead time, right? If one of your customers wants to buy a product, right, let's say they want to buy sneakers, and you hand make all your sneakers, how long is it going to take you to make that order, right? Is it going to take you 3 months? Is it going to take you 2 days? You want to be upfront with this, both with yourself and with your customers, because they're going to have expectations, right? So that's lead time, delivery, and supply chain, right? And then finally, if you're exporting, you're going to want to consider any kind of tariffs that are coming up, any kind of laws that you may need to follow in foreign countries, and so on and so forth for your distribution, right? So basically, you're talking about everything that it takes to get your product from where it is and what it is right now, which is the individual components, to your customers and satisfy their need, right? So you're going to be covering all of that in some detail. The next thing you're going to want to look at is pricing. Now, pricing can be pretty finicky, right? It's not something that's an exact science, right? So one, cover your cost. Cover your costs, right? This is really important, right? So if your price doesn't cover your costs, you don't have a business, right? You're just going to go out of business the second you run out of money, right? So you have to cover your costs, right? For that, you'll be using something called break-even computations or break-even analysis, right? And that's basically saying, okay, where do we break even? So if we sell 5 units for $5 each and it costs us $5 to make them, that's break even, right? But if we need to be selling 200,000 units at $5 each, then we need to ramp up production really fast, right? So you need to be able to get to that point. Okay, so that's pricing. The second thing that you have to think about is your competition. Where is everyone else pricing their product? Okay, so if you're coming out with a brand new chalk, right, for example, and a box of chalk is $200, there better be a very good reason for being very different from your competition, because the majority of people that go to buy chalk are going to expect a little box to cost about 99 cents, right? Maybe $2, maybe $10 if you have some phenomenal chalk, right? But they're not going to be expecting $100. So you're going to want to think about your competition and where their pricing is, right? Now, when you think about your competition, the instinct from a lot of people is to get into a price war or underprice their product, or underprice, the competition, right? So Nike is selling sneakers for $100. I'll price mine at $95, and I'll sell more than Nike. Okay, this has a few problems, right? The first problem is that you have no customer loyalty. Your customers simply don't care about you as a company. They only care about the price. And, maybe that's what you want, but in reality, that's not good for long-term business, right? The second thing is that Nike is a lot bigger and much more able to handle a price war than you are, because they have deeper pockets, right? So whereas you can bring the price down to a certain point, Nike might have economies of scale to let them bring the price down farther if you become a threat. Furthermore, even if they don't have economies of scale and production of the sneaker costs the same for both of you, Nike is going to be able to sustain a loss for much longer than you are, right? And so they can force you out of the market that way. Now, right before we get to promotion, I'd like to take a small aside, right? So one of the classes on our roster is business strategy, right? And this is just an interesting example from business strategy that often isn't considered, but that we'll be discussing, right? And it has to do with pricing. It has to do in particular with an idea called price matching, right? And you've probably seen this. So if you go to Walmart and you bring your Target price ad with you, right? And it says the Target's selling it for $1 less, Walmart will generally give you the $1 off, right? And so you might think that this is good for competition or good for consumers. But if you analyze it using the tools we'll learn in business strategy, what you'll find it's actually very bad. And the reason it's very bad is that when price matching happens, prices tend to increase, right? Price tends to rise. And the reason price tends to rise is for the following reason, right? If I'm Target, okay, and I'm offering you, let's say chalk for $1, and I'm Walmart and I'm offering it for $2, okay? In the past, by offering it for $1, I would bring in customers. Those customers would buy the cheaper chalk and then stay and maybe buy some paper or something else that would price a little higher, right? But today, the people are just going to go to Walmart and price match me. So my incentive for lowering the price disappears. And so I price at $2, right? Now, Walmart understands that its savvy customers that are trying to save money are going to look at the Target prices before they buy, right? And its unsavvy customers that are just going to pay whatever are going to be willing to pay $2.50. Now, Target doesn't want to get stuck in a bad situation where it's just pricing down the product but still losing all of its business, right? So it decides to price it $3. Okay, so that they can match Walmart's price and still sell it for $2.50 at a profit. And so this leads over time to escalating prices, and perhaps not the result that you were expecting. And that's why it's important to study business strategy. Right? And we'll talk about all of these things in a different class, but that's like a small promo and aside there, right? And so getting to that, the next thing we're going to talk about is promotion, right? So the first thing you want to think about is how are you going to create customer awareness, right? If I asked you to list 25 cereal brands off the top of your head, you probably couldn't, right? Even brand names. They don't have to be the manufacturer, right? Just what they're called, right? But if I asked you to look it up, you probably could, right? And the idea is the ones that you can list are part of your customer awareness sphere, right? You are aware of that product, right? So how you're going to do it is going to be three different ways. One is going to be personal selling. Personal selling, right? And when you do personal selling, you're basically going door to door, or you're hosting a booth or something like that, but you're selling it directly to your consumers, right? The second thing you want to do, or you're going to want to do, is advertising, right? Now, these strategies, importantly, are not mutually exclusive, right? So you can do multiple of them, right? But the idea is you want to look at what you're doing. And then the third one is public relations. Now, public relations really falls under advertising in a different hat, right? But it is advertising in a different hat, and for some consumers, it's very important. So, for example, right, like we've discussed before, if you're getting your coffee beans from only organic, certified, high-paying farmers around the world, that's a form of advertising because that appeals to your base, right? And so, but it takes it on a different form. It's not just you plastering billboards all over the place saying, we have coffee, come in and get it, right? So that's what you're going to want to consider when you're thinking about promotion. Okay, so before I move on, let me see if there are any questions in the chat, and then we'll move on to the next section of this lesson. So, are there any questions? Is international shipping something that a small startup should focus on in the beginning? International shipping. Okay. Well, let's discuss that. So let's see. So you're a new startup, right? This is our case now, right? So we're considering international shipping, right? And you are a new company, new startup. Okay. So should you consider international shipping? Well, let's think about it this way. Let's say you're manufacturing pens. Okay? You're manufacturing pens. Now, for every 100 pens you produce in the US, right? So in the US, you have 100 pens. Right? Let's say you need to produce 100 pens. Right? In China, you also need to produce 100 pens. The cost of labor is $100. The cost of labor is $10. And the cost of material is $100. And the cost of material here is also $100 because materials tend to be internationalized, right? But you might actually have savings in either one. Okay, so here you're paying about $2 per pen. Okay? Here you're paying about $1.10 per pen. Right? Clearly, you're going to want to shipping in China. But you know a lot about U.S. consumers. You know a lot about U.S. supermarkets. You know a lot about how to get it out there. So you want to be selling in the United States. Now, does it make sense for you if you're only selling 100 pens to both manufacture them and ship them over and then distribute them? Or does it make sense just to ship them internationally, right? If you're talking about international distribution, you're probably better off just shipping internationally, right? Now, in a situation where your startup is both producing something domestically and distributing it domestically, you probably don't have to worry about it, right? But your production will often not be domestic. And the reason it won't be domestic is because a lot of rubber isn't found in the United States, right? It's found abroad. And so wherever you find the rubber, it's probably cheapest to process it there, right, than ship it somewhere else. Same thing goes for different metals and so on and so forth, right? And you might also, by manufacturing abroad, escape tariffs, right? So for example, if your pens are made of metal, and metal is very expensive in the United States, right, and shipping metal into the United States is very expensive, what you might do instead is you might manufacture it in China and ship the pen in, and there's no tariffs on pens. Right? So that's a very important piece and actually pretty interesting. Right? So good question. So yeah, the answer really depends on what you're doing and where you're doing it, but absolutely there are situations in which you should consider international shipping as part of your startup analysis. Okay, so you're going to be doing a lot of research. This is inevitable, right? You're going to be doing a lot of research. Now, you might have some gut feelings based on your experiences and based on what you saw. This is great, right? This is a fantastic thing. If you're developing gut feelings about your business, then you understand your business pretty well. However, your marketing plan should still be based on research, right? And the reason it should be based on research is that you are always going to reveal more with research. You are always going to have less errors. Assuming that you are diligent and you know what you're doing, right? You're going to have less errors. And so you can take your gut feelings as a starting point, right? You can say, okay, well, I'm pretty sure that my consumer is probably like 55 to 60, so I'll spend less time checking what ages are good and more time figuring out what occupations and income levels are good, right? So you can use your gut feelings, but errors and depth are usually going to be gotten from research. Okay, so the research process consists of gathering, processing, interpreting, and finally reporting information, right? So when you're gathering information, you're going to be looking at first or primary and secondary sources, right? When you're processing information, you're going to be doing it in the context of your business, right? So there's going to be a lot of information, and we'll talk about the different types of information that you can use and have access to, but you're going to be processing it and interpreting it in the context of your business, right? So if you find interesting information on birth rates and you're producing something for 35-year-olds, it's probably not great information to use. If you're producing baby cribs, that's probably useful. And then finally, you're going to want to figure out how to report it. And this is the visual aspect of your data, right? It's a lot to know. It's a lot better to show it, right? And if you're able to show it and back it up, you're going to win confidence both from your customers, your investors, and the people you work with. Okay. So, there's a couple of steps to doing this research, right? First, you identify the information that you need. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to identify the information, right? And this is specific to your business. This is specific to your business. So what that means is as your business grows or shrinks, you're going to be doing something specific to your business, right? You're going to be evaluating data that could impact your sales and who you market to and how you market to them, right? The next thing you want to do is you're going to want to find secondary data. So this is the cheaper option of the two because this is data that has already been gathered. This is information that's already been gathered. Now you should be aware that you should be privy to the method of gathering and agree that it is in fact unbiased, right? And the location of gathering and so on and so forth, right? And how long ago it was gathered, right? So once you're done gathering secondary data, you're going to have some holes to fill in, right? And those holes are going to be primary data. So you're going to fill it in by gathering primary data. And some of the things you can do is you can do surveys, right? You can observe the competition. You can go out and talk to your customers. Whatever it is that you end up doing, right, you can do it that way, right? The important thing is that regardless of what you're doing, you want to aim for simplicity, right? So let's say you're writing a survey. You want to have simple questions, right? The more convoluted and difficult your question is, the less information you're going to get. And then importantly, you also want to engineer backwards. Now, this doesn't mean that I would like everyone to say yes to this question. Let me phrase it in a way that makes everyone say yes. This means, okay, why am I asking this question, right? Why am I asking this question? So, for example, a question like, well, let's say you're selling baby cribs, right? And here's the question, did you buy a new crib for each of your babies, right? So, obviously, you're talking to people that have multiple kids, right? You found some way to talk to them. And you're asking if they've bought multiple cribs for multiple babies, right? Or did they just buy the one, right? Now, the question is simpler if you say, how many cribs did you buy, right? Or why did you buy other cribs, right? Or has a crib lasted you through all the babies, right? And you want to think about how you're going to phrase that question. But the idea is the information you're trying to get out is how many cribs are people buying. And so you want to engineer a question to try to understand whether or not someone that has one kid, right? So now you're looking at demographics, right? So you're thinking about, okay, so if someone has their first kid, they're probably our customer because we make cribs, right? If someone has 7 kids, maybe they're our customer only 3 times, right? So maybe people buy a crib only every second baby or only every third baby, or maybe they just buy a new one every single time, right? Maybe they get it as a gift every single time. Whatever it is, you're going to want to look at primary data and you're going to want to engineer your questions in a way that presents you with multiple answers that are unbiased to your desired results. Now, you may want to hear that parents buy new cribs every single time, right? And so you may ask a question that may lead them, or that may lead to only people that have that situation to do it, right? So only people that have actually done that, and everyone else to skip your survey. And that's going to give you some messed up results and not what you need. And then finally, you want to interpret your data. Interpret, right? So you interpret your data, right? You visualize it, you create some compelling image about who your customer is and what they look like, right? You create some graphics that every person is having an average of 2 kids and so on and so forth, right? And it's important to note also that you don't always have to use direct data, right? So for example, if we go back to that crib situation, right, you might not have the data for a number of cribs sold in the US, right? But you might be able to find the data for number of babies born, right? Something on a per year or per 10-year basis, right? And so you might be able to reverse engineer the answers to the questions that you need. Okay. The next thing you want to do when you're preparing your marketing report, or consider at the very least, is your limitations. Right? So consider your limitations. These have to do both with budget and skill. Right? So you have a very limited budget. There's no point in overdoing it. Right? You have a very limited budget. Don't go out and design this crazy marketing campaign that you're never going to do. Just focus on getting the information that you need and getting it quickly and cheaply. If you have very limited skill in obtaining the information, find tools or people that can supplement that skill. Right? So your budget is going to be your constraint. And your skill is going to be something that you have to supplement. Right? So either hire someone to create compelling visuals, hire someone to sift through data and do statistical analysis and so on and so forth. Right? So that's what you're going to do with your limitations. Okay, you're going to want to consider them even before you start setting out to do stuff, because you really don't want to waste your time or your money going through this amazing marketing plan and then you've run out of money to actually start the business, because you're not in the marketing plan business. Okay? Next, you're going to want to understand your target market. Right? So you've gone through all this work to identify exactly who your target market is. Right? now you're going to want to gain an understanding, right? And so that market is just a group of customers that have three things for you, okay? They have, one, they're a group. If you found one guy, he's not a group. Two, they have an unsatisfied need. Some unifying need that you're able to settle or help them with. And three, they have purchasing power. And this is an important piece, okay? So again, if you're selling cribs, babies have unsatisfied needs in that they need a place to sleep. Babies are a group, but babies don't have purchasing power, okay? Parents, however, are a group. They have an unsatisfied need that they need to please their babies and give them a place to sleep, and they have purchasing power, right? Now, if you're pricing them out of the equation, so if the average person in your group has $100 to spend and you're pricing your crib at $1,000, you're going to fail, right? So that's going to inform your decisions on where you're going in your target market, right? And you're going to want to segment this market based on a few things, right? The first thing is based on benefit. What benefit are you providing to your customers? And you could be providing multiple benefits, right? You really could be. You could be opening a baby supply store, right? And if you open a baby supply store, then they'll have a bunch of things that they're just looking for, and you'll say, okay, well, you know, my demographic is parents. They all have the ability to spend money. However, these are the following things. And it's actually interesting. These are the following things I can satisfy. So something like, you know, a baby monitor, or software for your iPhone to keep an eye on the babysitter, or a crib, right? And so you decide which of these things you'd like to provide and which of them have the best opportunity. And you segment those people into that group, right? Now, importantly for target markets for babies, that may not be the best example because a lot of things are bought at baby showers by non-parents, right? So you may actually have to think about that, about who's actually buying your product, right? And who the end user is, because they're not always the same. Right? It's just like the example of the stream, right? So for example, all of you are my customers, right? However, the people funding the stream are not you, right? The people funding the stream are someone else, right? There's overlap for sure, right? There's overlap between viewership and funding the stream, right? But the reality is the majority of my funding, right? If my purpose is to serve people that don't have access to a college education or want access outside of college or can't afford it or whatever it is, or just simply wish to learn to improve their skills and kind of move out into the world, then if I'm charging those people, I'm looking for two different people, right? So I need to split that up, right? And the demographics is going to depend on the age, right? The gender, right? So this is something like 25 to 35, female occupation. Let's say students, right? Marital status, single. Right? And income level, right? Let's just say low. Usually this is a number, but let's say it's low. Let's say it's 25,000 and under, right? So we're looking at a demographic of female students, ages 25 to 35, right? And probably we should be looking younger, but let's say 25 to 35, that are single and have lower incomes, right? And so we know who we're targeting, right? And now we start looking at where those people consume and spend their money. Right, where they hang out, what they do, where we should be putting up billboards, and how we can reach that group, and importantly, what that group values in a solution or a product. Right, so you can do a couple of things differently than what I've described. Right, you can do a mass marketing strategy. In general, you're going to get lower results per dollar. Right, so your results per dollar spent on marketing are going to be lower. And the reason is you're reaching a bunch of people that just don't need your product, right? And there's no real point in reaching them. So you're reaching a bunch of people that don't need your product, but it can work and it can help you uncover other demographics, right? So you can reach out to a bunch of people maybe that weren't covered in your research and see who comes in. So let's say you open a spa and you figure, okay, well, my spa is for working adults with a certain income. And then you have a bunch of kids coming into your spa with their parents because those kids need physical therapy and so on and so forth. And so you could find a new market, right? That's mass marketing. The second thing is you can have different messages for different people. different messages, right? Which means that you likely won't be able to change your corporate identity, so you won't be able to be more hip or more whatever for a specific customer group while also retaining another one, but you will be able to advertise differently, right? You'll be able to advertise differently to different groups and price differently for different groups, right, in order to lure them in. So you're going to have more specialization if you have multiple products. But that only happens if you pursue multi-segments, right? Which means that you've defined several segments, right? Hopefully sharing some attributes, but you've defined multiple segments, and so you have to design different messages, right? The majority of the time, when you're running a small business or starting a company, you're going to define a single segment, right? And your single segment is going to define what your message is and how you tailor your product, right? And in turn, they will affect how you change your product and how you do it. And this allows for a couple of interesting things. This allows for specialization, and this allows smaller companies to compete against larger ones, right? So we'll term that David and Goliath, right? Because just about everyone knows that story, but for those that don't, Goliath was this big, giant guy, and David was this little guy with a slingshot, and he defeated Goliath with his slingshot because he was smaller, right? Now, that doesn't really lead to specialization, but in this case, you can compete with Nike in the sneaker market if you find a demographic that they're not currently addressing and that has a need for sneakers, right? And this is a great way a lot of companies will pursue this strategy in specialization, looking to be bought out by a larger company, right? So that's very important. Next. The next thing you want to do, so you've identified your demographic. You've decided how you're going to do all this. You've decided how you're going to ship products, how you're going to move them around, who you're going to market to, what strategies you're going to pursue, all of those things, right? So now it's important to think about your market potential. What is your market potential, right? And this simply means that if you're successful, how much money are you going to make, right? To call it more formally, it's called a sales forecast, right? So your market research, right? So let's say the squiggly line is your research, right? Your research will serve as a barrier. So for example, you're not looking at people that are 40 plus, you're not looking at people that are less than 25 years old, right? You're not looking at men, right? And you're not looking at people that aren't students, right? So all of these people, right? Women, students, 25 to 40, right? That's your target, right? So that's the start of your forecast, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to think about both your short-term and your long-term forecast, right? And there's two ways to kind of build that, right? So the first way to build that is the breakdown. And in the breakdown, what you do is you say, okay, well, there are 300,000 people that fit my need, okay? In my geographic region, there are 50,000 people that fit my need, right? I'm able to advertise at 7 bus stops, which could potentially reach 20,000 people that have my need, right? Of those 20,000 people, I know that approximately 1,000 visit a store while I'll be selling, right? And approximately 300 will have the money to actually buy it, right? And in the breakdown, you're starting at something large, right? So this is US, this is maybe state, this is local, right? This is distribution, and this is price, right? And you're narrowing it down. You're saying, okay, well, my successful campaign would be about 300 people buying my product, right? The other piece of it, or the other way that you can do it, that's not the breakdown, is the opposite, the buildup. And in the buildup, you start at something similar but very small. So you say that, for example, you're doing dry cleaning for high school uniforms. Okay, and you say there are approximately 5 high schools in my area. Each of those high schools has 100 students, so there's probably 500 students. Right? And we've captured, and we expect to work with about 20% of those students, right? So we should be selling about 100 dry cleaning per month, per day, per year, whatever your measure of metric is. But you're starting on a small scale, and you're building up to the largest scale in the final number. Right? Now, there's a couple of pitfalls in this, in creating your sales forecast. The first is that it's going to be inaccurate. And that's to be expected. Right? That's to be expected. It's expected to be inaccurate. You're going to want to make it as accurate as possible, and the better your research is, the more accurate it'll be, and the better you interpret your research, the more accurate it'll be. Right? So if 50,000 people walk down the street in front of the store, right, but only one of them is ever your customer, you've probably done something wrong in the research. Right? The second thing is that you're going to want to remember scaling. Right? And I've seen this happen a lot. People will say, okay, well, you know, there's 10 businesses by me, and I'm the closest coffee shop, and there's 100 employees per business, so I can serve about 1,000 customers per day for coffee. Okay? But on their expense side, they're saying, yeah, okay, I'll be the only one working at the coffee shop, and I'll just keep making coffee, so I'll have one employee. And the reality is, if you want to serve 1,000 people between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., you're going to need a shit ton of employees. Right? And if you're not scaling that cost, you're going to get very, very different numbers in your sales forecast. Okay? Because if you're unable to service the customers because of an internal limitation, that's also bad. Right? So you have to remember scaling, and you have to kind of be cognizant of that happening and think about how that's going to look. Finally, or perhaps two more points, right? The first thing is that you can't always make it quantitative, right? So sometimes it's okay to make it qualitative. Sometimes, but very rarely. Usually if it's a very new venture, very different, very unpredictable, you can do something in a qualitative manner, right? And then finally, if you don't make it qualitative, you can make it trend-based. And this is probably a no-no, unless, you know, your product's already selling like hotcakes and you're just like projecting 10 years into the future, right? So when you're making a sales forecast, you're going to want to make one short term, right? Which is generally less than a year, less than 1 year, right? And you're going to make one long term, which is usually no greater than 5 years, right? If you push it any more beyond 5 years, it becomes very unpredictable, and there's really no point, right? But what's important, just like what's important in the business plan, is your thinking, right? So you need to, at every step, you need to be jotting down what your assumptions were. Well, we assume that if 50,000 people, 30,000 are going to walk into the store. Because when 30,000 don't walk into the store, you're able to go back and revise that assumption, right? And that brings us to our final point with market potential, and importantly with your marketing plan. It's just like your business plan, this is going to be a living document. This is not something you make on the first week of your company and then you never look at again. This is going to be something you keep adjusting, you keep refining, you keep making more accurate, you keep discovering, you keep looking for more answers, right? Because it's going to assist you in making decisions at every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, you're selling something. No matter what it is that you're doing, you're selling something. Whether it's for nonprofits, whether you're not charging or are charging customers, it doesn't matter. You're still selling something. And so this living document is going to serve as your compass, right? As your compass. So when you have a compass, right, and you're able to say, well, you know, we predicted that maybe this direction was the best way, right? But we're seeing a lot more pull come from down here, right? So maybe we should be moving in this direction, right? Maybe we should be adapting to our customers, right? Or maybe we're doing something wrong with our marketing. Maybe we're marketing to this group by accident instead of also marketing here, right? Maybe we should be hitting marketing from outside here and here in order to hit the needle where we want it to be, right? And so you're going to be working almost constantly with this document, and it's going to assist you in what you're doing. And that's entrepreneurship and small business management, our unit on the marketing plan. If you guys have any questions, let me know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 5-minute break, or 2 to 3 minute break. And I'd actually like to do a couple things. First of all, before I take my break and come back, I'd like to say, one, thank you all for being here. Two, if this is your first time here, make sure you follow the stream. You can find all of these lectures on YouTube right after they're done here. But I like to do them live because I like the Q&A and I like being able to interact with you guys, okay? So, before I go, I'm going to ask you guys the following question. You're always welcome to give feedback on the stream and ask questions while I'm teaching, right? But what I'd like to ask today is, what are your goals? What are your goals? And this is something that you can consider it as part of my marketing plan, right? So I'm streaming this and I'm showing it to you guys, and you guys are here consuming it. So I'd like to know, what are your goals? Are you simply here to learn? Are you looking to open a small business? Are you interested in finance and economics and have not yet gone to college, or you're already gone through college and you're trying to refresh your memory? Are you trying to acquire new skills? Whatever it is, put that in the chat for me. If you don't wait for after the break, that's okay. I appreciate it anyway. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you very much for being here.